Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. It's that time of the week and I hope you're comfortable because we've got gardening by the absolute barrow load for you. Here's what's in store.
I'm meeting a group of gardeners from the Yarra Ranges whose houses and gardens were damaged by a severe storm. It truly is an inspirational story of resilience and recovery.
I'm visiting a spectacular collection of thousands of beautiful bromeliads. Let's check these beauties out.
Are you short on space for productive plants? Garden bed's already full? Or maybe you haven't got a garden at all? Well, I'll show you some simple ways to squeeze in more plants to all sorts of spaces.
And if you've got some ornamental bark on your trees, I'm going to show you how best to display it so that it can be admired.
Today, I'm getting out of the rat race and heading for the hills. Everglades House and Gardens span over 5 hectares on Gundungurra land in the World Heritage listed Blue Mountains. A garden from a bygone era, it's currently owned and cared for by the National Trust New South Wales. Simon.
Costa, nice to see you. Welcome to Everglades.
Great to meet you. Wow, it's breathtaking.
It's not a bad place to work.
Simon Cooper is the head gardener. So, compared to Sydney, this is a cool climate garden.
It is. So we're about 1,000 metres above sea level, above Sydney there, and roughly 5 to 6 degrees cooler. Plant accordingly to our elevation and temperature, and we've got some classic cool climate plants like the pieris and some beautiful old maples as well, and they've become a really beautiful part of the garden.
The garden was designed by Paul Sorensen. He created over 100 gardens during his career, but he's best known for Everglades, built in the 1930s.
There's a hell of a slope that comes down this property, so it's all been terraced out to create these rooms, and they're all held back by these magnificent stone walls.
The work that's gone into them, and they're so incredibly straight after all these years.
This one is probably my favourite wall on the property, about 30 metres long.
The way that each of those holes has a natural curved piece of stone, it looks like they're actually pieces of pipe.
It does. I think he went to a lot of thought in doing this part of the wall, just to create these little domes for planting in, little amphitheatres of stone.
It's all leading to this.
It is. So probably another focal point in Sorensen's design of the garden. So it comes down to this very large urn, which is in front of one of the significant trees in the garden. This wych elm, which is one of the early original plantings, and they're a little bit rare, a little bit hard to find. Under the urn here, under this elm, we've got this lovely ground-covering juga with the tall purple spikes, and that can be found throughout the garden. Barely maintain it, and it'll spread very, very happily, either in the shade or in the sun.
So who was the owner of this place?
The owner was Henry van der Velde. He is a Belgian-born entrepreneur. He bought the property in 1932, 1933, and basically started building a house and garden as a weekender.
Wow, a weekender. Was Sorensen given a free rein in terms of the design?
To a point. He and van der Velde would consult regularly on their views of the garden and what they wanted to see. Sorensen commissioned this kind of artwork in the courtyard of these wrought iron panels that would tell the story of van der Velde's Sealyham Terriers. He also had peacocks in the garden, and the dogs used to chase the peacocks, terrorising the peacocks, and then Mr. van der Velde with his golf clubs chasing the dogs away from the peacocks, and he would catch them and he would lock the dogs up.
And while there's plenty of the personal packed into this place, these days the house and gardens are open to everyone to come and have a look at the grand design. Where in the world do you get to frame anything remotely as spectacular?
Not many places. I think one of Sorensen's design points for this area of the garden is he couldn't really compete or didn't want to compete with the grandeur of the valley. That is one of the main focal points in the garden, one of the most popular spots, as you could probably tell by the lawn. It's all worn in front of that window. And because it frames, you've got an automatic picture.
Beautiful space, but what about all of the moss? This wall is amazing. It's like it's alive.
It's really...
Our tour continues deep into the Everglades estate.
This is the very lower end, almost the very lower end of the garden, so it's the southern end.
So what was Sorensen's intention for this part of the garden?
He had an influence by Japanese gardens at this point. He did do some of it while he was here, and other gardeners along the way have continued that vision.
I mean, there's a massive amount of structural work going with the creek line and all the stone.
It is, so these are thought to be all hand-picked and hand-laid to create this little meandering watercourse. There's rock tubes for the water to go through and small little waterfalls and pools. The way that the maples kind of hang over the watercourse as well, it's a great look.
Looking out over the glade area, the eucalypts are just stunning with the grass beneath them.
They do stand out. You've got the nice lush green grass, but then you've got the white stem of the eucalypts, and they complement the area quite well. And we are doing our best to retain as many natives down in this area as we can. In the event where we can actually leave a dead or a dying tree, we'll try and do that to create habitat. So instead of removing the entire tree, we'll just remove the canopy and create a few small slits higher up for microbats. There's hollows for possums and birds as well.
The Banksia there is such a feature.
It is, so it's quite an old specimen. Kind of matches in with the stonework as well. They kind of look almost the same, the bark and the stone. It could almost be a stone tree standing in the glades.
This is quite the view.
It is.
Looking down, listening to the water, seeing the rocks. How did it come about?
At the end of the 1930s into the 40s, Sorensen was down here with his workmen, digging a lot of this grotto pool out, all the soil and the rock, and then somehow managed to put a 40-ton boulder at the end to dam the pool and create this naturalistic part of the garden.
From up here, you just feel like it was always there.
So we've got a lot of ferns, so we've got king ferns and the tree ferns, and we've got dudea ferns as well, but on the rock face, we've got the rock springilia or Springilia monticola.
With the little white flowers.
With the tiny little white flowers. It's a native to this area of the mountains, a bit rare and a bit special, and it likes to hang on these sandstone walls.
And further along, a cluster of towering exotic trees return us to the European roots of this garden. This part of the garden has such a different feel. There's so many large trees.
It's a tight grove of planting of conifers and the occasional oak. So this is the alpine area of the garden. It was created basically to mimic what alpine area in the European environment looked like. They do look good when they're planted in a grove like this. It's a bit more naturalistic than having one featured tree out by itself, and we're doing our best to maintain them and keep them in a healthy condition.
And this was Sorensen's vision, and now you're maintaining it.
We're keeping it in perpetuity for generations to come, hopefully, as best as we can.
For me, Everglades is a place to let the imagination run wild, to ponder, to wander, and to incubate the next big idea in my own little patch. And later in the program, Simon will be sharing with us his tips for propagating a cool climate favourite, the rhododendron.
What is wrong with my peach tree? Well, this is a really common problem. It's a fungal infection called leaf curl, and it commonly afflicts things like nectarines and peaches. Now, the treatment for this is actually done in the depths of winter when the tree's completely dormant before those buds even start to swell. You spray it with a registered fungicide. Now, I did that, but this tree has still got it, a terrible infection. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do except support the tree's health. I'm going to mulch it, I'll give it a really gentle feed and keep the water up to it. And most of these really badly affected leaves will drop off, or I'll pick them off and get rid of them. But it's something that I need to pay a lot more attention to next year.
Why are some native plants grafted? Well, the aim of grafting is to take an attractive and maybe fussy plant that you want to grow in a particular area that may not otherwise grow there. So we take a cutting or a scion from a particular plant that we want and we graft it onto a rootstock that is more suited to a particular location, type of soil, or even microclimate. Now, we need to take the same family or at least the same genus. And in the case of many growers, grevilleas will graft onto the rootstock of Grevillea robusta, the silky oaks. So lots of different natives can be grafted, and it's normally just using rootstock that is more suitable to a particular location so that you can grow the things you want a little easier.
There are two broad categories of potatoes, indeterminate and determinate. The determinate ones just grow short, bushy shrubs, so you don't have to mound them, while the indeterminate potato varieties will grow taller and can benefit from mounding. These ones that I've got here are determinate, short bushes. Now, instead of planting them in one straight line, around 40 centimetres apart, I plant them in a zigzag pattern, like so, and I can get heaps more plants in per square metre. It's a real game changer. I've added another 5 plants into that same area, which means that we can get more food.
Small, colourful, lightweight, portable, adaptable. I'm talking bromeliads. Tammy's uncovered a jaw-dropping collection and she's showing us why they're worth hanging around for.
I'm in Gymea Bay in southern Sydney, where friends of mine are growing thousands of beautiful bromeliads. Their driveway is teeming with plants they've propagated for selling, sharing, swapping and collecting. Let's check these beauties out. This is truly a bevy of bromeliads, and today I want to show you some of the intriguing features of these amazing plants and inspire you to put up your own bromeliad hanging basket. There are more than 3,000 species in this huge Bromeliaceae family. Most originate in tropical areas of North, Central and South America, and they're a true evolutionary success story. They can grow in a huge range of habitats, from deserts to mountains to tropical forests, and from high in the canopy to down in the ground. Broms range from the sturdy, spiky pineapple to delicate air plants such as Spanish moss. They can be terrestrial or epiphytic, meaning they either live in the soil or not. Some can do both. This is a Neoregelia hybrid. It's got these spikes all along the edge of the leaves, so you have to be a little bit careful when you're handling it. And in the center, this is the cup. This is where the plants collect water and nutrients, and it's a common feature of most bromeliads. Now have a look at these unusual ones. This one's Bilbergia. It's more compact and upright, with these rich burgundy purple leaves that are spotted, much like the Milky Way. And in the center, we've got these white flowers that are kind of on their way out. And when a bromeliad does flower, what's interesting is that it starts to die. And in the meantime, it sends out these pups or baby plants, which can then be propagated or broken off and planted elsewhere. Now this one's really cool. It's called a Quesnelia, and it kind of looks like it's had the hot rollers in all night. I wish mine looked like that. Every nook and cranny here is covered with broms, and there are even more out the back. Wow, Look at this collection of tillandsias, which are also part of the Bromeliad family. The roots of tillandsias, or air plants, are used almost exclusively for support, and they've evolved to survive in tiny cracks and crevices that capture rain and leaf litter. It's a huge group, with many that can be identified by their fuzzy layer of trichomes, or hairs, and they need a good balance of humidity and airflow. So you can see, Broms grow in a different range of habitats, in trees and also in soil. This one here is Nerogelia bottoms up, and it's a beautiful specimen. And apparently, it looks better from the bottom. I think I agree. A great way to show off these beautiful and intriguing plants is in hanging baskets. Let me show you how easy it is. I'm choosing plants with smaller habits in different colours, textures and shapes, like this Vreesia, Nerogelias and Aikmia. My basket is lined with coconut fibre, which is great for drainage, and Broms love that. I'm using an orchid mix, which is light and coarse and also good for drainage. I'm filling my basket to about halfway before I start planting. I'm starting with the Vreesia, with its beautiful yellow flowers, and I think I'm going to put it at the back because it's taller. Next, I'm going with this Nerogelia, and these spots will contrast well against these plain green leaves. And next, for some textural contrast and colour contrast too, I'm going for the Aikmia. Now, lucky last, this Nerogelia. Now, I could split them up. There are a couple of plants in here, but I think it will look more impactful as this bunch, and it's quite sculptural too. And now just to backfill, and it'll be good to go. Sometimes I find it's easier just to use my hands to get into those little pockets. And now for some water. When watering, don't forget to keep some water in the cups, especially in dry conditions. And there you have it, a beautiful basket of bromeliads. Broms truly are remarkable plants, and they come in a vast range of sizes, colours and textures. The only problem you'll have is, which ones will you take home?
It's no surprise that I'm constantly filling my garden with plants. But there are times when the beds are full and I have to find alternatives, which is what I need to do with this batch here. I'm going to pop them up into grow bags. Grow bags are a great solution to a space problem, especially in smaller gardens with limited room. Even a set of steps or a driveway can be utilised as growing areas, provided you've got access to sun. They're also easy to move, so you can shift them when either more sun or occasional shade is required. They were really handy at our last place where we were renting, because it meant we could take at least part of our garden with us. And as you can see, when you're not using them, they take up a lot less room than empty pots. There are all sorts of grow bags to suit the growing requirements of different plants. This one has a volume of 39 litres and is a perfect size for growing a compact blueberry variety like this one, which is Sunshine Blue. Blueberries like acidic soil, so I've used azalea mix here, which is perfect, and these handles make it really easy to move the bags around. This one's smaller, at 16 litres volume. Have a look at the walls. These are actually made from recycled plastic bottles. It's a spun fibre, which means that water easily passes through it, but also air gets in. And that means that the roots don't get root bound by circling around like they do in a plastic pot. They grow to the outside of the bag and then they stop. I'm using a general purpose premium potting mix here, which has excellent drainage and is perfect for lavender and an underplanting of common thyme. Grow bags not only come in different sizes, they also come in different shapes and materials. This one's square and is made from jute, but it also has a waterproof lining, which means it's good for plants that like slightly moister conditions. But importantly, it's also got plenty of drainage holes so water can drain away. I'm using the same general purpose potting mix and I'm planting native lemongrass, which has fragrant leaves and ornamental flowers and seed heads. It's something a little different to the common lemongrass, which I also grow. This bag is made from coir, or shredded coconut husks. Apparently, it will last for 1 to 2 years before breaking down. And once it does start to deteriorate, you can put the plant straight into the ground, bag and all, or compost it. Here, I'm planting a jalapeno chili, again using premium potting mix. Spuds are probably the classic grow bag crop, and I've had plenty of success with this method over the years. Here I've combined 50% potting mix and 50% hydrated coir to make a low-cost media that is also a bit lighter than straight potting mix. Start with about 150 millimetres of mix at the base. Lay out your seed potatoes, then cover with another 100 millimetres of mix. Once the seed spuds shoot, keep adding mix around the stems as they grow until the bag is full, but don't smother the tips. Potatoes will set off the stems of the plant and can be harvested as baby potatoes or larger potatoes once the plants die down. Like any plants growing in containers, they'll need regular watering and fertilising to thrive. You can see just how easy it is to add some extra gardening real estate to your place, no matter how tight space is. And by choosing the right plants, it can be productive and also look good.
After a natural disaster, there are so many priorities for individuals and communities, both emotionally and physically. And for many, the path to recovery is often found in their own gardens. Jane's found an inspiring story with a group of gardeners and a local council who have banded together to start to repair the fallout from a devastating event.
In 2021, one of the worst storms in Victoria's history struck the beautiful Yarra Ranges east of Melbourne. Over an entire night, residents of Kalorama were subjected to the terrifying sounds of wind, rain and falling trees, many up to 50 metres high. Fortunately, no one was killed, but houses were crushed, gardens destroyed and lives changed forever.
We'd had something like 300 mil of rain. We had all those huge gum trees that you can see around here that were waterlogged. So with 100k plus winds, we had tall trees falling everywhere. The damage was extraordinary. So the damage to homes, we had 200 families affected. And when you combine that with businesses as well, it was something like 1,000.
One of the residents who experienced the full force of nature on that night was Kerry Mason.
You could just hear trees crashing and could hear them in the distance, and I think it started probably about 5 o'clock, but it was just getting more and more intense. And sitting in front of the fire, and about 8 or 9 o'clock I sort of heard this crack, and I went, oh, that was a bit close. And then I looked up at the window and at the ceiling and noticed that there was a hole in the roof. So, yeah.
Because you're surrounded, literally, by
yeah.
trees, even now, even though the tree. How many trees actually fell?
It's about 6 or 7. The main damage was caused by a mountain grey gum that fell alongside the house because all the branches hit the roof.
It wasn't just the house that was badly damaged, but also the garden. Luckily for Kerry, a council initiative called Healing in Our Gardens was quickly set up.
Well, that's been amazing because just the support really does help take some of that stress away.
We had a number of council officers who lived in the area and, you know, including myself who is on council, hearing lots of people say, yes, it's really important that we get back in our homes and we recover from that. But we also have these gardens that have been affected and, you know, not quite sure where to start or are overwhelmed with that. I think we've had 160 families that have signed up to receive support, and there's been about 14 individual events. We've had information sessions about bringing butterflies to your garden or starting a garden from scratch. We've also had more of the lend a hand community involvement type events, such as we've got here today.
Habitat for Humanity is an international non-profit organisation that's also supporting the Healing in Our Gardens program. The coordinator is Tom Alexander.
It's really impressive what a group of activated people, like-minded people can do for their community.
It's great, isn't it? I
It's
can see them all
fantastic.
in the background. They're all chopping weeds out and pulling ivy off things, and it's really very good.
I'm one of the people who've been affected by the storm. We all need so much work done, and this is a brilliant program, bringing the community together to help each other. Together we can all achieve far more in one garden than we will individually, of course.
That's right. How were you affected on the night of the storm?
Well, our home was badly damaged, and it's a split level, and upstairs was pretty well destroyed. But unfortunately, we're still not back in our place, and restoration delays. There's been long periods of time where there's been nobody there, and moisture has got in, black mould went through the whole house, and ultimately everything inside had to be stripped back to what was left of the bare frame. And,
It's pretty devastating, isn't it? So how many trees were on your block?
Oh, we had about an acre with about 60 or so of these large mountain ash trees, and every tree came down.
Does this program, does it help your mental, ability to sort of come back, to get on track
Yeah, look,
again?
it really is important. I mean, I still struggle. I get quite emotional about it. But a program like this, to get people together who are affected, it's just fantastic. And, we share our stories, and we're all here helping each other.
The residents who are volunteering for the Garden Bees come together about once a month. We work for a day or so in someone's garden, and then deciding who is actually going to be the next garden that we work on, that's up to the residents and the volunteers who make that decision. So some gardens we'll come back to twice, others we may only visit once, but it's the community that decides where we go next to actually continue to support the community in this really practical and wonderful way.
You're another one who had massive damage.
Yes, but luckily I'm back home and into my house, and already Healing in Our Gardens has been to clear my paths. Now it looks like my home again. One of the things I've loved is one of my camellias, which would have been about 70 years old, was sheared right down the middle, and I've got photos of when it was sheared down to the middle and what it looks like now, and it's just so good. And it was partly what helped me to get positive again, because I felt that if the plants can do it, I can do it.
Every gardener understands the importance of their gardens, but for the community in the Yarra Ranges, they really have taken on an even deeper level of significance.
At times over the last couple of years, it was like, got me low at times, but then things like this happen, and, you can really sort of see the possibilities. Healing in the Gardens, it's our own little, garden community now. Hopefully we can keep on going and helping each other.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, I learn how to propagate a cool climate classic. Jerry's lifting the lid on compost, and we meet a market gardener whose family history led her to the garden. There's a real underdog in the world of gardens. Forget showy flowers and finicky foliage. When was the last time you appreciated some good bark? Well, Sophie's here to show you how to make bark the standout in your garden.
Bark plays an integral role in the life of a tree, but it's also a wonder to behold in our gardens. I'm going to show you a few things you can do to really show it off as a feature. There are quite a few layers in bark, 4 in total, with each layer performing an important function. While there are 3 inner layers, it's the outer layer we can see that we're going to focus on. Its main function is to protect the tree from water loss and disease, but these bark formations can be so beautiful that there are many ways you can use them when designing a garden. My Arbutus andrachnoides is a type of strawberry tree grown for its showy textured bark which sheds each year. Its orange-red bark is flaky and peels off to reveal a smooth, paler trunk underneath. Make sure you have the right tree. This species is non-invasive and doesn't self-seed, like its weedy cousin Arbutus unido, the Irish strawberry tree, which is a registered weed in South Australia and Victoria. If you want to show off the bark and make it a feature in the garden, the first thing you can do is lift the canopy by removing the lower branches. Make sure to cut near the raised bump at the join, which is called the branch collar. Be careful not to cut through it. This is where the tree will heal over the scar. It can't do that without the branch collar. My second tip to show off your bark is to keep the plants underneath low enough that you can still see the trunk. Underneath my Chinese elm, I've planted Salvia murrii and Teucrium fruticans or germander. Both have a dense habit and can be clipped into shape with shears. That way, this multicoloured mottled bark receives some limelight. My third tip to feature bark is to place it where it can be easily seen. Here, I've planted a long row of Sydney red gums and Gopher costata along my driveway. They're perfectly placed to greet visitors on their arrival. These trees are famous for their earthy, rust-red coloured peeling bark and iconic squiggly limbs. You don't need to have a long driveway to gain this effect. Plant your tree in a spot you will visit or view often to bring you joy every day. My fourth tip is to position plants with contrasting colour and texture near to the trees to highlight the uniqueness of the bark. My Silver Princess Eucalyptus caesia is another iconic Australian gum with blood red to silver branches and decorative curly bark. This type of bark is known as Mini Ritchie, characterised by its deep reddish-brown colour that continuously peels in small curly flakes. What I've done is plant Old Man Saltbush as a backdrop and the silver succulent Cotyledon silver waves in the foreground. Crepe myrtles are known for their masses of showy flowers and highly ornamental bark. This exfoliating bark peels off in thin layers to reveal a marbled effect, which helps the tree process water and gases. Bark really is the hero of our gardens. It provides year-round texture, colour, and plays an integral part in the health of the tree. It's also an overlooked design element. So when you're selecting which trees you're going to plant for the future, you'd be barking mad not to think about the beauty of bark.
Here at Everglades House and Gardens in the Blue Mountains, head gardener Simon Cooper looks after a collection of rhododendrons that date back to the 1930s, when Everglades was built. And Simon's showing us how he propagates this classic. So with a cutting, when do you do your cuttings?
After flowering, they'll start to put on some beautiful cutting material. It's a shrubby one, about 2 metres tall. So basically, cutting, so right down to where the softwood meets the hardwood. You want something at least 10 centimetres long.
Okay, and then what's the next step?
I'll just put a small wound on either side, just a shallow shave. That increases the surface area for the rooting powder or the rooting gel to take hold and encourage those roots to grow. We've got a mixture here of coir fibre and perlite, so 50-50. Make sure it's moist, makes it easier to get into the pot. Got a pencil, a little hole in there for our cutting. Snip a few of the lower leaves off. You want to leave probably about 4, 5 leaves and cut those ones in half to reduce the transpiration that comes from those. Dip that into the rooting hormone, stick that into your coir fibre. You want at least an inch covering. Keep that moist, keep it out of direct sunlight.
How will that progress?
So probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks, depending upon your conditions, you'll see roots starting to come out of the bottom of the tray here, and then we'll pluck that out. We'll put it into a 6-inch pot, and in about a year, you should have a cutting that looks a bit like that, and in a bit less than 2 years, you'll have a cutting that looks like that.
But worth a go.
It is. It's always worth a go. It saves you money.
If you want to create a bold tropical feature in any climate, look no further than the spear lily. It's a favourite with gardeners due to its unique flower heads. This striking red and fleshy flower spray grows linearly along the stem, which leans in a graceful arch, as you can see here. Now, the stems and the roots are edible, but they're not that tasty. But the flowers are full of nectar, which attract bees, birds and butterflies in the spring. A relative of the Guiamea lily, it has a tough, clumping growth habit with large, sword-shaped leaves, just like its cousin. This hardy native grows up to 2 metres and makes a stunning feature plant in large containers. It's ideal for full sun and part shade in gardens with well-drained soil.
Have you ever popped the lid on your compost bin and wondered who's living in there, scurrying to get away from you? Well, Jerry's on the case, and he's got a few little friends he wants you to meet.
The engine room in any good garden is undeniably the compost heap. And on Gardening Australia, we talk about compost all the time, and for a very good reason. Your compost heap is garden magic, turning what would otherwise be landfill into the most invaluable gardening material you'll ever lay your hands on. I'm going to introduce you to some of the workers who are labouring night and day to churn out this garden gold. My composting technique is simple. I use the lasagna technique. So for each layer of kitchen scraps that I add, I put on a layer of dry fibrous material which I gather from other plants growing in my garden. Plants like my soursop, jackfruit and bamboo are perfect sources. Adding these fibrous leaves every time creates a good balance between carbon, the leaves, and nitrogen, the food waste in the bin, which prevents it becoming a pile of wet, smelly, rancid waste. You should never add meat, rice, bread or pasta to compost heaps. They'll stink and they'll attract garbage flies and blowflies and their maggots. And you'll get rats too. Every day, I give my compost heap a splash. Moisture is important for keeping the compost actively breaking down, and inconsistent dampness can slow it right down or cause it to stop completely. I get about 4 bins worth of compost every year, one roughly every 3 months. This damp, crumbly product is nutrient-rich and vital to keeping everything ticking along in my productive garden. But what's going on? What's making it? What's happening inside in the dark, damp recesses of my compost bin? And what are those creatures scurrying away when I open the lid? Well, it's time to meet the family. The first residents you'll easily identify are vinegar flies. They're compost makers. and the second are compost worms. They're essential for breaking down organic matter into worm castings, a vital element of any rich compost. Compost worms are a different type to earthworms. Earthworms burrow deep into soil to increase soil porosity, and they live happily on less nutritious organic matter like fallen leaves. Compost worms like a rich feed, such as vegetable peelings from the kitchen. They live in surface leaf litter and organic mulches, and they enjoy warm conditions. Give them what they need and they multiply like crazy. If you have a new garden, you'll need to introduce them into your compost bin, either gathering them from another compost heap or buying them from a nursery. Now, this is something you may have seen, but you may not know what they do. Woodlice, also known as slaters, are not actual bugs, but instead are small terrestrial crustaceans closely related to lobsters and crabs rather than insects. There's some nice woodlice. Now, woodlice are useful in the compost heap because they eat and digest organic matter, and that accelerates the compost making. This is the first time I've ever seen one actually feeding. Now, in the compost bin, they're allies, but out in the vegetable garden, they're not. They have a habit of nibbling seedlings, so they're welcome here, but not elsewhere. The limiting factor to their spread is consistent dampness. Being crustaceans, they depend on humidity in order to breathe, which is why my compost bin is the safest place for them to live in my garden. Here, I'm happy for them to chew away to their heart's content, because by breaking down plant matter and accelerating the compost-making process, they're working for me. Soldier flies are one compost resident that you may have noticed but may not have made the connection with the adults, because the flies camouflage themselves to look like wasps. Adult soldier flies are about 15 millimetres long. Adults fly fast and are attracted indoors by bright lights. They're an introduced species in Australia and are now found worldwide. The larvae have a hard, bristly outside, and they look totally different to soft-skinned maggots. On a really hot evening, when I add kitchen scraps to the top of my bin, you can hear these little creatures as their bristles rasp against the side of the bin as they crawl up to have a feed. Soldier fly larvae are eating machines, and great to have in your compost, as they can convert large amounts of scraps into compost very quickly. In fact, they're being used commercially to break down industrial amounts of food waste that would otherwise be sent to landfill. Moving on to something probably most of you haven't seen, to keep my compost factory ticking over, I've enlisted some extra helpers. These are Sorinum cockroaches. They don't enter houses or spread disease like pest cockroach species, and they run from sunlight. They're an introduced insect, and they don't travel very far from damp compost or leaf litter. Mine were a gift from a visitor, and they too speed up my compost making, a gift that keeps on giving. Have you ever found a weird stripy thing that looks a bit like a worm, or maybe a slug, or possibly a leech? Well, you may have flatworms. Flatworms have been spread around the world by global horticulture and were first identified at Kew Gardens. Well, they're not worms and they're not slugs, and importantly, they're not parasitic blood-sucking leeches. Leeches loop as they move, rather like this looper caterpillar. But the good news about flatworms is that they're predators, and that's useful in this garden. You see, when these millipedes get out into my vegetable garden, they become a problem. They eat seedlings, and they'll nibble the feeding roots of orchids. So these slimy midnight marauders are my allies in the garden and here in the compost heap, because they hunt and kill these millipedes. And these are just some of the more obvious creatures. In a happy compost heap, there are literally hundreds of different species, but they're too small to see with the naked eye. Every particle of compost is literally teeming with thousands of minute creatures and single-celled life forms madly swarming over the bounty, all doing their bit to decompose organic waste into compost. Bacteria, fungi, amoebae and protists. If you found something and you don't quite know what it is, your state museum may run an identification service worth exploring. The result of all this labour from my little helpers is this: mature compost, and in a shorter time. Look at this. It's textbook stuff. It's rich, it's crumbly, completely odourless, and yet it's full of nutrients and brimming with life. I use my compost all around my garden. I mulch hungry citrus trees, I top dress pot plants, I add it to potting mix for rainforest plants and ferns, I dig it in when I prepare seed beds. It's what puts the life into what professionals call biologically active soil. Now you know some of the characters that you'll find in your compost heap and the vital roles that they can play in helping you to get the best out of your garden. Think kindly of them next time you open the lid and feed your livestock.
There's no denying Tassie is a food destination. And for every incredible ingredient that ends up on your plate, there's often a skilled gardener behind it. Our next story is with a grower who's turned a block in the burbs into a flavour-filled food supply for local chefs.
I love herbs. I love using herbs. I feel as if it's like, not only do they taste superb and make things taste fantastic, I think we don't make enough use of that. And so I very much encourage people to use herbs and use lots of them.
I'm Sue Lynn Lamb. I'm in my garden in South Hobart under Kunani, and I'm a market gardener. The footprint is about an acre and it just sort of flows around the house. I've got some little herb gardens and some citrus growing on one side, a lot of herbs on the other, some apple trees, and then down in this main section, it's mainly annual vegetables. I didn't start at the outset to become a market gardener. I was always interested in growing food, I think because of my heritage and because of the upbringing that all of my siblings and I had. We had a Chinese dad and an Italian mum, and they always really valued fresh, good food. And they also had the heritage of coming from families that grew vegetables in their home countries. My mum came from Udine in northern Italy, and her family were growers, small producers, basically, of vegetables. And my dad, he came to Australia at the age of 15 or 16. He did experience famine through his village, and I think that really had a big influence on both his love of being able to produce food, being able to feed the family. You could feed yourself. After my dad died, fairly young in life, I remember going to Chinese grocery stores and feeling his presence, actually. And I feel his presence in my garden. I met Rob in Sydney, and we've been together 33 years. Rob just turned 80 last year, and I'll turn 68 this year. When we first moved in here, the house was incredibly run down. There was no garden, and I thought I had a big job ahead of me. So Rob and I started gardening up here together, and then I started working on soil health, and then I was like a little mole. I was underground for so many years. And Rob used to say,
what are you doing out there? Nothing seemed to be happening. I was working on soil the whole time. He loves to document me in the garden. He's often up on the balcony taking photographs of whatever group I'm taking through the garden. Also incorporate a little bit of air and that compost, and it won't destroy the structure that was there. I do have people coming to help me in the garden, and they've come from all walks of life and all ages. Sometimes they might talk about their week, and there's something about being involved in physical activity that allows you to talk heart to heart, and we'll often end up having a lot of laughs and sometimes sharing some personal stories as well.
Susie's my sister, and she's my oldest sister. She's the oldest of 6 and I'm the youngest. We've all been interested in gardens, the whole family. I like to work in the garden. It's kind of nice to have connection with Susie. I am astonished at what this block, this suburban block, can yield.
She's a good gardener because she absolutely loves it, and she knows so much, and that's because of her love of it.
So I've got these radishes over here. It may not be commonly known, but there are a lot of very small producers in Tasmania, and they provide really fresh vegetables to the chefs, and they have a personal relationship with chefs in restaurants.
I mean,
Would you like me to let some bolt on purpose?
I'd love to.
I can.
Because I try and convince people.
And the chefs are very appreciative of what we produce.
You know, her passion that is just integral to like what she does, and she seems to always just be like rabid with excitement, you know, like she sees something or wants to tell you about something and makes you consider all produce differently. Just to be able to say like, hey, this is grown just up the street, you know, like 15 minutes away from the restaurant. Like, we're super lucky to have a resource like this.
Mum always says to me on phone calls, what's growing in your garden? Because over the years, she's always asked me that question because she was such a keen gardener herself. And I thought, normally I'll list things or maybe send photographs, and I thought, I can do better than that. Hi, Mum. I want to tell you about a little collection of shrubs. So we've been making videos for Mum, and we've been sending them to her. She's in a care home now because she's quite elderly, almost 90 now. I've been receiving a lot of composting materials like grape bark and coffee grounds, and gardening is so important between us. I think something my mum left as a legacy for me was the joy in the tiniest nuance in the natural world. And my dad, I think he would have loved my garden as much as I do. I think we would have shared it with great joy had he lived longer. There is something that touches me deeply about growing food for people and feeding them. There's something so visceral about drawing something concrete from this tiny speck of dust that you've placed in the ground. And here you are, here's a meal for you to grow your body.
They say a rolling stone gathers no moss. Well, get ready to roll, because here's your fresh list of jobs for the weekend. In cool areas, check plants for frost heaves, which can expose crowns as the soil warms. Harvest what's ready or cover back up with soil. Sow chickpeas 5 centimetres deep and water weekly. These nitrogen-fixing legumes will bear final frosts, attract beneficial bugs and make delicious hummus. Maintain hygiene and give bird baths a clean. Give it a wipe down with diluted vinegar, then blast it with a hose before refilling. In warm temperate areas, hedges that flower through winter and spring will be pushing out a new flush of growth. Tame them now to encourage more flowers. Train grapevine shoots while they're green and flexible. Tie them to a trellis to give each shoot access to light and create airflow. Give the lawn some love by patching up bare spots. Aerate soil with a fork, add a sprinkle of fertiliser and topsoil, then level it out. In subtropical areas, clivias are blooming brilliant in the shade and will love a dash of chook manure. Cut back finished flowers or let seeds ripen for propagating. Alternating your watering routine so plants aren't watered daily will help them adapt and recover, plus you'll save on water use. Harlequin bugs suck out plant sap and will harm your hibiscus. Sneak up on them in the morning and drop them into soapy water. In tropical areas, carnivorous pitcher plant hybrids get the bulk of their nutrients from insects, but hybrid cultivars will enjoy a yearly pick-me-up of very diluted orchid fertiliser added to the mister. As melon season ends, check the ripeness of Hamigua and rock melons by pressing the blossom end. If it yields, it's ready to rock. Put a pause on pawpaw mosaic virus spread by insects and unclean tools. Affected plants can be safely tossed in the compost. In arid areas, propagate everlastings by taking cuttings now. Pull off lower leaves, snip the tips, place in seed-raising medium and water weekly. Drought-tolerant Californian lilac attracts butterflies and bees. Apply slow-release fertiliser and give it a light trim after flowering. Consider seasonal succulents that will add colour and form at your place. The red on yellow of Aeonium are a standout. Hungry for more? Remember, if you need a hand getting started, check out the how-to guides on our website. Wow, what an episode. But it doesn't stop there. Here's what's coming up next time.
Magpies are the quintessential suburban bird, and we're often so familiar with them in our parks and gardens that we barely give them a second thought. Well, today I'm meeting a pair of researchers who have spent years observing these charismatic birds.
I'm visiting this amazing garden. It's on the outskirts of the city and it is the home of an award-winning horticultural high school project. They're growing incredible produce and I reckon the gardeners of the future.
And I'm showing you how to keep your garden's colour going beyond summer.